Welcome, and greetings to all. I am Shen Long Pendragon, the Lore Master. So as always, a quick disclaimer. I don't own any of the images or the story in this video. The credit for these all belong to their original sources. So today I'm going to be exploring whether or not Egypt is the survivors of the so-called City of Atlantis. Now, some of you are probably raising your eyebrows at this, and for very good reason. This is very much a topic up for speculation and debate, so do bear with me, and I hope you enjoy the video. So, what exactly is Atlantis? Well, Atlantis is an ancient city that was supposedly lost beneath the waves of a sea somewhere. The exact location is very much debated and unknown. Most of the stories around Atlantis put it as a Greek-like state, or sometimes even as one of the Greek city-states, which is why most of the images of Atlantis have it with very much Greek-like architecture and showing Greek gods. But as you may see in this story, that could be a misconception and may not entirely be accurate. So, where exactly is Atlantis? Well, the truth is, nobody knows, but there are plenty of places where people believe it could be. So here we have a map from the 1900s. What it is showing is the rough sort of position of Atlantis as shown by that large white bubble in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. If you come a little bit to the right of it, you can see that there's a smaller bubble in a sort of dotted outline. That is showing the estimated position for what they call the Pillars of Hercules. According to the original Athenian story, the island of Atlantis, or the city of Atlantis, lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And I will come back to the pillars in just a few minutes. So you'll notice that the rest of the map has these sort of white markings on it. This is based off a falsified history of Athens, where Atlantis was Athens' mortal enemy and supposedly had its own empire and sphere of influence. The white is showing what the estimated sort of reach of Atlantis was in terms of its empire. Again, I would like to point out that this is based off a falsified history of Athens, so this map and its outlining is in no way, shape or form true. So you can see here on this map of the Mediterranean that there is a group of red circles randomly appearing on the map. These circles are showing the estimated locations of the Pillars of Hercules. The first one that was appearing, the one that was up in the north of Turkey, if you come a little bit to the right of it, the area labelled as Barassa, well, that around that general area is one of the estimated places that Atlantis could have been, though research and theorists have mostly said that they believe that's not to be true, that Atlantis was not in that area. Some of the other locations which have been, for the Pillars of Hercules, which have been identified is around Cyprus, and particularly around Crete. Now, Atlantis itself was believed to be a Mediterranean colony of Greece for many, many years, which is why I've highlighted those areas, because these are showing some of the areas where people thought it could have been. Again, though, most theorists believe that that's not the case. So if you come across to where Gibraltar is, you'll notice that there's a star over it. That's primarily because the Pillars of Hercules are believed to be in the Straits of Gibraltar, hence why I've put a star there, to show that that's the most accepted theory currently. So, ladies and gentlemen, this next map I'm going to be showing you is of more or less my estimations of where Atlantis may have been if the city such did actually exist. So first of all, let me describe the map that you're seeing. If anyone is not familiar with this map, though I will assume the vast majority of you are, what we have here are the plate boundaries. In other words, the different plates that make up the Earth's crust. The thin black lines show the boundary lines are where the plates actually meet. Obviously you have sections of these plate boundaries which are marked as subduction zones. Now again, for anyone who's unclear of what a subduction zone is, that's a point where one plate is sinking beneath another, and quite often you'll find that you'll get volcanic activity associated with subduction zones. So the next bit to move on to, which is the actual sort of bit that I wanted to come to for this map, is what they call the proposed hotspot locations, which are marked by the little red dots that you can see pretty much covering a lot of the globe. Now, if anyone's not clear what a hotspot is, that's basically like a column of magma that rises up from the mantle and meets the plate. And quite often where a hotspot forms, you'll see islands appearing. The two most famous of these are Hawaii and Iceland. Now, you'll notice that Hawaii is actually an island chain, and as the vast majority of you will know, that's because the crustal plates actually move. So as the plates move, but the hotspot stays in a central, or rather a stationary location, it creates a chain of islands rather than a single massive island, which is what's happened to Hawaii. However, in Iceland, because Iceland is on a plate boundary where the plates are pulling apart, but the hotspot is stationary, there is no island chain forming. So as you can imagine, because it's not right in the smack bang in the middle of the plate, it's actually on the boundary itself. So therefore, it's got a big island which is seemingly getting slowly pulled apart. And that's the primary difference between Iceland and Hawaii. So now the important part of this particular map. Why am I showing you it in the first place? Well, it's because of this little hotspot right here, Azores. Now I've highlighted Azores because that is one of the proposed locations for Atlantis. You'll notice that it is very close to the meeting point between three plates, and if you also look at some of the older maps based off the Athenian legend, it does mark that the supposed island of Atlantis is relatively close to Azores. Again, this is just pure speculation, so do bear with me. When we consider the supposed reason for the destruction of Atlantis, in other words, the Great Flood, while the Athenians said that it was due to the Atlanteans' hubris and they were being punished by the gods, the Jewish belief was that 10,000 BC, the Great Floods were actually caused by earthquakes. And now if we consider Azores' position very close to the meeting point between three plates, it's not that difficult to imagine that an earthquake could have caused a tidal wave in that location. Again, it is just speculation, but it is one theory that is reasonable, in my personal opinion. Anyway, let us move on. So, ladies and gentlemen, the next question to really ask ourselves is, how is this relevant to ancient Egypt, and why am I even telling you this story in a series about ancient Egypt to begin with? Well, I'm just about to explain that to you now. So, ladies and gentlemen, the image that you're seeing now is a bust of the Greek philosopher Plato, and he was the one who initially came up with the falsified history of Athens, where the Athenians supposedly fought this great war against the Atlanteans. Now, obviously, Plato being an Athenian himself, and like most Greek philosophers in that day and age, they believed their own individual cities were the greatest thing since sliced bread. This was a very, very common ideology within Greece, that they considered Greece to be the perfect sort of centre of the universe, and their own individual city-states were the greatest thing in that universe. So obviously, according to the falsified history, Athens is, for lack of a better term, Zeus's gift to Greece, whereas the Atlanteans were pretty much the spawn of every evil being in the Greek mythos, for lack of a better term. So, obviously, Plato used this ideology of Athens fighting the Atlanteans. Most of his students believed that his story was nothing more than just a false story, just made up by him in order to prove a philosophical point. One of his said students was this man, Xenocrates. Now, Xenocrates also used this Atlantis story to prove his own philosophical points while teaching his students. Now, obviously, his students primarily were also of the mixed opinion that Plato had simply made up the story to prove a point. But there was one student in particular that actually believed the story. And that is this man right here. This is Cantor, who out of all three of these Greek philosophers is probably the most famous. So, Cantor, as I've already said, actually believed Plato's story of Athens fighting the Atlanteans, and he decided that he was going to try and prove this story was true. So, during a trip to Egypt, he came across hieroglyphs that were depicting an Atlantis-like state, and supposedly were members of the Egyptian royal family had come from this state. Now, the important thing is that this Atlantis-like state was being shown as getting destroyed by waves, and then what was left of them arriving in ancient Egypt and basically establishing a new dynasty there. Cantor himself also believed that these hieroglyphs proved the theory that Atlantis did exist, even though they certainly didn't prove that they had anything to do with Athens. And as I've already said, the most accepted date for the destruction of Atlantis was 10,000 BC, which stems from the original Jewish belief of the city. So, ladies and gentlemen, are you still with me so far and listening? I do hope so. Anyway, the next sort of question I've got here is, are there any modern adaptations of the Atlantis theory? And the only way I can answer that is, where on earth do I begin to answer that question? There are so many different movies, films, books, you name it, which represent Atlantis in some way, shape or form, or an Atlantis-like state. However, I've got two examples which immediately come to mind. So the first example that I've got for you for modern adaptations of the Atlantis theory is this one, the Disney movie Atlantis: The Lost Empire. I first saw this movie when I was probably about 6 years old, give or take a year, and this was the movie that really first got me interested in looking into mythology in the first place. The premise of this movie is that a group of explorers go off to try and find this lost city, and when they actually eventually do find it, they find that the city is primarily in ruins, but there is not necessarily a thriving, but a surviving civilization still there, which has been cut off from the bulk of the outside world, with very, very little influence on them otherwise. Where they actually find Atlantis is somewhere off the coast of Iceland. In fact, I think it's meant to be underneath Iceland. Now, this is one theory that has been presented before, that Iceland may be where Atlantis could have been, and it is, again, just another theory. If you remember the hotspot map, again, it is a possibility that Atlantis may be associated with Iceland, but there is very, very little evidence of it. And most of the theory around that one stems from a fiction book where an explorer supposedly went looking for Atlantis, found it, and wrote a journal about it. And in fact, that journal plays a big role in this movie. So, moving on. So the second example I have for you here is the movie 10,000 BC. And as the name suggests, this goes off the theory that the city of Atlantis was destroyed by a great flood roughly 10,000 BC, and the survivors ended up in ancient Egypt to establish a new dynasty. Where this ties into the rest of the movie is the young man you see on the front here facing off against the Smilodon, or saber-toothed cat, leads a small expedition into ancient Egypt to try and get his people back from slave traders who kidnapped them. Personally, I actually enjoyed the movie, though I can understand why many people wouldn't. If you are interested, then you can find both this movie and the Disney one quite easily from Amazon or HMV, or pretty much any sort of retail store that stocks DVDs. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thus ends the legend of Atlantis. I do hope you enjoyed the video. As for my personal opinions on whether or not Atlantis did exist, well, that's an interesting one to answer. Do I believe that the city of Atlantis may have existed or could have existed? There's a small possibility. Do I believe it actually existed? Well, in truth, I have no idea, but it probably didn't. Either way, it is a good story, and it's a nice sort of legend to do, and how it ties into much of the sort of mythologies of the rest of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then please remember to like and subscribe for more lore, myths, legends, and stories. Yes, that is a fish swimming across the screen, and yes, I have attempted to do some sort of underwater bubble effect. I do hope you like that. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to apologise for the delay in getting this video up. I had wanted to get it up last weekend, however, my recording equipment went and done goofed on me, so I had to redo most of the recording for this. Anyway, again, I do hope you enjoyed the video. And, as always, I am Shenlong Pendragon. And remember, knowledge is power.